everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, where every show I talk to writers about their work, the publishing industry, and how they do what they do. The show is available by the same name on both YouTube and by all of the major podcast platforms, and you could subscribe to either or both so you never miss a thing. I, of course, recommend both. Some of us like to watch, some of us like to listen. Do what you do you. But definitely please hit subscribe. I'm going to come back to that a little bit later. But right now I want to get into my guest, because my guest today is the best-selling author of multiple crime fiction series, as well as a great standalone book. He's won enough awards for those books to fill a showcase or three, and rightfully so, because he's really a great writer. His latest book, Reckoning, the third in the Ty Dawson series, comes out as we speak. On the day we're recording this, I believe it is coming out today. Anyway, I am reading the first in that series, and I can tell you nobody does modern Western fiction better than my guest today, Baron Birtcher. And best of all, he's a really cool guy too. So, hey, Baron, welcome to the Open Mic. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm doing awesome, Britt. After that, I'm really doing well now. Thank you.
Well, absolutely. Well, let's first of all, the latest Ty Dawson novel, did it come out today or was it yesterday?
Yeah, it came out today.
Okay, so I'm 2 for 2 today and getting publication day out. I'm reading the first in the series, which I noted, but it's for those who do not know, it's South California Purples, and it is fabulous. So I'm really anticipating reading all of these, and especially Reckoning, now that it is out. Tell us a little bit about Reckoning, for those who may not know about the series. Tell us a little bit about Reckoning and the Ty Dawson series.
Well, the Ty Dawson series is a contemporary Western thriller series that is set in the 1970s. And what we have is, imagine Longmire meets Yellowstone in the decade of the 70s is the elevator pitch for what we have here, essentially. And what it is there's a agrarian corner of 1970s Oregon that has lived as it has for hundreds of years, raising cattle, raising agricultural products, and so forth. And here comes the age of Aquarius, and a whole lot of cultural upheaval in the country, and a whole lot of political upheaval in the wake of Watergate. We have the war is still raging. We have anti-war protests devolving into civil skirmishes. We've got a horrible economy. No one trusts the government. There's a whole lot that is happening. Why? And there's nothing that this rural county can do to keep it at bay any better than anyone else can. So there's a lot of change coming. And this small community relies heavily on rancher, now Sheriff Ty Dawson, who's a man who represents Old West values, tough but fair kind of guy, very decisive in what he does and very clear on his sense of right and wrong. And hence some clashes ensue.
Well, I've heard you noted that it was Longmire meets Yellowstone. I'd also heard a Matt Dillon reference thrown in there from some folks, describing Ty Dawson, which of course I grew up with Gunsmoke. I'm sure you did too. That resonates with me as much as anything. But what it all comes down to is it's the kind of protagonist. He's the kind of protagonist that I feel like a reader can really root for. You said tough but fair. That really resonates with me because that's what he sounds like. But tell me a little bit about how he developed, how he came to be. Is that a character you'd been thinking about for a while and maybe even thought about for other books? And just how did Ty Dawson come to be for you as a writer?
I am glad you asked me that. I have been thinking about doing this series for quite some time. And I was raised in a very rural community in Southern California back when there was such a thing.
Hmm.
And we had, I was raised on a small ranch. We had horses. We were surrounded by orange groves and cattle ranches, and it was a very agricultural world. It was San Juan Capistrano was the little town that I was raised in. It has changed considerably since then, but it was a world that I knew, and I was riding horses since I was a kid. And it was part of my upbringing, and it was part of the culture of my family and my family's friends. So I really wanted to revisit it, but I wanted to revisit it in the decade of the 70s for a particular reason. And that was that I was a teenager. Yeah, I was 13 in 1973. Okay, so I was seeing a lot of all of this cultural hoo-ha going on, but really not understanding what was going on. And as you do when you are a young person, whatever's happening to you is just the way it's always been. So to watch the nightly news with my folks and to see body counts from the nightly tally in Vietnam, I didn't know that that was unusual. And I didn't know that watching, student riots on TV was unusual. I didn't know that parents were worried about all of that, particularly as it related to my older brother and sister. My older brother, about that close to being in a position to register for the draft. So we had a lot of conversations about the things that were going on out there, having to do with drugs and free love and all of the turmoil, all of which I witnessed, as I say, through the eyes of a teenager. As now I have grandkids of my own, I have really appreciated the complexities of raising kids, and a new appreciation for how complicated and how scary that must have been for my folks at the time. So I had a lot of long conversations with my dad, who happened to be passing away as I was writing the first of these books. And we knew it, and he knew it, and all of that. But it gave us a chance to really reminisce together, and for me to ask him some very, pointed questions about what was that like. So Ty Dawson really became sort of a stalking horse for me, if you will, to sort of view the world of the 70s through my dad's eyes, as a 40-year-old man raising a family and facing cocaine in the 1970s.
Well, he's very dedicated to his family, and that's an interesting thing to see too. Words like family values, have become so loaded, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the political things here, but I appreciate that kind of a character. You and I have had a chance to talk before. I didn't come from a rural background, but my mother did, very rural. And I remember very distinctly my grandfather and my uncles that were raised in those environments, and just the way they carried themselves and the way they viewed the world. And I didn't agree with them on all kinds of things, especially, the perspectives of somebody, who was born in 1896 are going to be very different than, me probably. But there were other things, just there were the dedication to family and to the responsibility of caring for your children and your family was something I really took to heart. So that little bit is very appealing. You do that very well because it's not overdone. You can beat people over the head with things, or you can just show them in a way that they absorb, and that's how I feel very strongly about the Ty Dawson character. So good job on that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
But I wanted, you noted that it's set in the 70s. And now, of course, now I've talked to other writers too who said their stories in the 60s or 70s. And I was also a teenager in the 70s. So I completely understand. I was probably the only 10-year-old riveted to the Watergate hearings, right? But when you go back and you do these things, those writers have told me there's so many details that you forget because you just live them. You forget how, and it's every little thing. You can't have a character do certain things that we do now that we just take for granted. So they said it actually made it a lot harder. They thought it would be easier. Well, I lived in it. It'll be easier, but it ended up being harder. How was it for you? Did you find that all those little details and everything were little, little stick pins in your writing for the day, or was it easier than that?
For me, it was much easier. The culture, the way I remember things looking and feeling and even smelling, uh, I remember those things very well. What was new to me and what did require a lot of research is the why were all the adults so worried about everything? Why were they thinking that all the teenagers were running around and, oh my God, they're going to smoke pot, and then 2 days later they're going to be shooting heroin, and this is the world is going to hell. There seemed to be a lot of pearl clutching over things that we who were living through it that were young were like, that's not a real problem. But but they their perspective was very different. And again, as I said earlier, having now been through parenthood and dealing with teenagers and so forth, it is a lot of guesswork going on about how do you where do you draw the line, and how do we understand the culture that they're dealing with. Whether I can relate to it or not. And that's the place where my parents were, and your parents, and everybody in the 70s. So that part required some research and a different level of empathetic criticism.
Well, I really want to touch on the popularity of Westerns too, because they've always been popular with viewers, with readers, with listeners. But for, most of that time, that popularity has been rooted in our vision of the Old West, the 1800s. And now there is a lot of interest in the more modern West, the trials and tribulations of the New West, where, the modern world and the old world collide, and with a lot of tension. We've mentioned Craig Johnson's great Longmire series, Yellowstone, which of course Taylor Sheridan is making a fortune with, mining that shaft for everything it's worth. What is it about the West and that lifestyle and culture that resonates with so many people, even still today?
I was thinking about that recently. Your question is very timely, because it just literally this morning I was thinking, why is it enjoying a resurgence? Because it has gone through periods of dormancy over the years, but there's a lot of interest now, and I think one of the things is clearly this is all going to be just conjecture and opinion on my part, but one of the things I think is that there is a nomadic quality to the concept of a cowboy. And there is not a whole lot of nomadic opportunity in modern life that really has a lifestyle attached to it. That's at least not one that is sort of culturally acceptable or culturally understandable. So I think the nomadic sort of breathing the clean air and working outdoors with your hands is an appealing thing. I also think that there's a kind of line between right and wrong that cowboys seem to carry with them culturally, where when you cross that line, you know it, and there's a consequence, and it's fairly immediate.
Right.
And a lot of the rest of the world that we're dealing with, particularly right now, seems to have a lot of soft, fuzzy edges where I don't really know. I don't know where the line is. And I think we as humans, sometimes we kind of like to know where the boundaries are. It's comforting.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there's definitely a longing, I think, for simpler times, though I don't, I think we overemphasize the simplicity in a way because, back in those days they didn't have cool things like penicillin and flush toilets too. So, we got to take the good with the bad, right? And the bad with the good. But yeah, I mean, there is something to be said that iconic image of the kind of cowboy maybe that we were presented with in the beginning days of mass media, who, with the white hat and the clean shirt. And, the thing that cracks me up, of course, and this very, very well, and I've spent a little time around horses, though certainly nothing like you. Horses are a lot of work. Ranching is hard work, man. That lifestyle is hard work. So I think, people, we romanticize the guy riding off into the sunset when we forget how much work it took to get the saddle on his horse.
Well, and the dependency of the rider and the horse upon each other.
Right.
That was not a relationship that went just one way.
No.
Both of them were dependent on the other. And one of the things that I always love about you can always tell a real cowboy. And I say cowboy regardless of gender, because there's plenty of really top-notch cowboy women people. And they call themselves cowboys too. So
yes.
There you go. Anyway, a real cowboy takes care of that animal first, and they can be hungry, tired, any number of ailments or injuries, and nothing happens to take care of the cowboy until the cowboy's taken care of his horse and fed him and cleaned him first. And that's how I always know a real one from a dilettante.
Yeah, that is so true. And I grew up with that because, we were, my sister and I, my cousins, we were the first generation in our family that wasn't raised in, that rural environment, but my mom was, and that mantra was in us. We always, the animals always get fed and taken care of before we do. To this day, I get up, the first thing I do is I take care of my dogs. Right. Whatever it is they need, I take care of all, and I couldn't imagine doing anything any other way. It's not the same as a horse, but the mindset of you are always second, right? You got to take care of those.
It's exactly the same thing as a horse, though. The mindset that you just articulated is exactly what I'm talking about, and it's the reverse of narcissism, and I find that liberating, and I find it refreshing in an era full of selfies and black mirrors in the shape of telephones that are really just narcissistic devices. And it's another thing I love about writing the 70s is there isn't any of that.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, I want to, before we leave that, I want to touch on one more thing here, because, all that being said, it still feels like there is this huge divide right now between the urban and the rural worlds. We had a chance to talk about this a little bit at BoucherCon recently. But I think we've been trained, and we're being trained more and more every day, to make a lot of presumptions about people based on where they live, how they might dress, etc. And it goes all directions, right? Were you ever concerned as a writer that people might prejudge the Ty Dawson series in a negative way, just based on their own stereotyping of rural people or Western people? Is that something you ever had to even think about?
It has crossed my mind, and I can't tell you why. It crosses my mind far less now because it really hasn't come up. I think that when people read the books and when they get to know Ty Dawson, they realize that I, I don't have a, as an author, I don't have a point of view. I'm not trying to sell anybody anything. This isn't the 70s were better. This isn't, I don't have a political frame of mind that I'm trying to put forward. This is just, I am really trying to be an honest broker of what history kind of looked like and certainly would look like through this man's eyes under the circumstances he's faced with. As a result, I really haven't had a whole lot, I haven't had any pushback about anything really. Not even, things like, well, it really wasn't like that. Because frankly, anybody that wants to say that is, I don't know. I was there.
Right.
You're going to have to sell that opinion to me because
Right.
I was.
Well, hey, look, man, I'll just say this. The book is so good. I don't think if that's your issue, go find something else to read, man.
Exactly. I kind of can't help it. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having my back there.
So, you were a professional musician for many years. You even had your own record label. And I know you've probably been asked about that a lot, but it made me think of maybe a just slightly different perspective, because the music business is so tough and it's so cutthroat and can be so unfair. It really made me question, I guess, did you find that background helped you at all in terms of when you started writing novels? Because I don't think the publishing industry is anywhere near as cutthroat as the music industry, and I could be wrong. You know better than me, but what from your time there helped prepare you for how this industry works?
Structurally, they have some distinct similarities in terms of just how they operate. For instance, back in the old days, here's the defining line between the old days and the new days: Amazon and pre-Amazon. Okay, so in the pre-digital era, because it affected music and books kind of at the same time in a very similar way. Back in the pre-Amazon era, the key to being successful as either a musician or an author was distribution. And if you couldn't get your product in a store on a pretty wide distribution level, your ability to make a living was going to be very, very difficult. It was going to be hampered. And there were a lot of gatekeepers that were minding the gate between the people that wanted in and the people that were going to get signed and that were going to actually get a chance with Epic Records or Warner Brothers Records or Polydor or whomever, and to get that first album out and to get some money behind you to go be an opening act for some, for Eric Clapton or whatever, and get seen. And that was the trick back in the day. Well, and the same thing, I don't have to describe the same analogous behavior in the book business. It was kind of the same way. You had to be in bookstores and you had to go do book signings, and you needed to be seen and meet people and meet booksellers, and they would hand sell your book. And I began writing when that was still a thing. I came in at the very tail end of that. And frankly, I loved it. Booksellers hand selling books was a lovely thing. As a reader, I used to very much appreciate that. I appreciated going to a record store and having somebody tell me, "Oh gosh, you like Badfinger? Well, you'll probably like Big Star too." Well, okay, you need that as a fan. In the post-digital age, where there are no gatekeepers now that can keep me from writing a book on my laptop. I don't even have to edit it It doesn't even have to be good. I can just upload it and it's for sale. And I put a cover on it and now it's a book, just like James Patterson or James Lee Burke or any other James you can think of. Uh, it's as legitimate looking as anything else, whether I put in the time or not. And the same applies to music. I can do I don't have to spend $100,000 with session musicians. I can I could make a record on my laptop in my basement, and I can upload that to Spotify, and I'm as legit as Pink Floyd. I may not be as good, by the way, I'm not, but there you are. So is that good or bad? Well, there's some egalitarian elements of that I think are kind of neat. And maybe eliminating some of the gatekeeping is a healthy thing. On the other hand, consumers are now drinking from a fire hose.
Yeah.
And it's not about distribution anymore. It's about discovery. So the trick is, how do you discover the artists that you're really going to like when there's 8 million jillion of them and 1,000 new releases every day?
Yeah, I totally agree.
It's a conundrum.
You walk into a bookstore, even though it feels like, they're harder to find, but there's a billion titles. There's just a billion. And how do you choose? There's not a radio for books. You used to be able to, you listen to the radio, you decided what you liked. You got this. Right. Even now with radio, it's all been so streamlined. As I'm part of a music group on Facebook, and I always use the term corporate whore radio because it's turned everything. I can remember growing up and listening to very eclectic stations where I would hear some soul and funk, some Motown, not that far from Led Zeppelin, and you made a Big Star reference. You might actually hear Big Star on the radio in some of those days, and now it's classic rock or it's whatever. It's all siloed off, and so you don't get to discover anything new through radio. And with books, it's the same thing. It feels like it has to be word of mouth, or somebody has to clue you in that, hey, that book's pretty good, and that seems to be the only way we learn anymore.
I think the radio for books is you. It's shows exactly like yours, where you are. You're not necessarily curating, but what you are doing is introducing your audience to authors and or subjects that they may not have known about otherwise. And I know that I've learned about a lot of some of my new favorite authors because of podcasts exactly like this one and exactly this one. Because
and I will tell you, Baron, I said this. I was on a panel at BoucherCon, and I told the audience when we're talking about this, one of the things that bothers me with a lot of writers is that they go to social media and everything they do in that space is just buy my book. Hey, my book's on sale here, or this book. They don't do anything to connect with readers. And if there's anything I feel like I've learned as a reporter, and I've been a reporter for a very long time, is you need to find a way to connect. I always tell my interns when I get interns every year, we're in the relationship business. We're providing a news service, but it's in the relationship business. You have to build relationships with our readers, with your colleagues, with your sources. That's how these things work. I feel it's the same thing with books. And I feel like I've talked with writers who've told me they do much better with sales when all of their stuff in the public sphere isn't about selling. So that's the thing I try to do here. I would like us to have a conversation that is about your book, but also about writing and about things that hopefully somebody will watch this or listen to it, and they will say, that Baron Birtcher guy, I like what he said. I'm going to check out his books. And I want to make very clear here, I don't make a penny doing this. Nobody pays me to be here. This is just, I do this because I love it. There's so many things I have to do in my life to make money. This is not one of them. I do this because I love it. And if someone can discover your work or anyone else's work through this show, then I think that's great. And it's something that I enjoy doing. And I hope that's what people are getting out of this. I really do. So that's the end of my little spiel. Interrupt your.
Well, I think you're spot on, and the more of this that we can do, as the world continues to transition to more digitization, not less, this is the way to discovery for anyone that you haven't heard of. And it's always funny. I used to laugh back when I was in the music business, and I laugh to this day. Uh, when you meet someone who's never met you before, hi, hi, I'm Baron Birtcher, and blah, blah, oh, okay, are you an author? Yeah, yes, I am. Uh, uh, have you done anything I know? I I don't know. I don't know. What do you know?
Yeah.
I've always got a kick out of that, but or my other favorite. Well, I've never heard of you. So, well, I've never heard of you either, but we just met.
And I'm sure somewhere in there is, well, where do you get all your story ideas?
Well, that's usually a second or third question, right?
Yeah,
Where do your
absolutely.
ideas come from? And, hell, I don't know.
You've done another. Well, actually, before I go there, I want to ask you one more question related to music because I almost forgot about this one, but I understand you have a ritual around music that's part of your writing process, and I would love it if you would share that with me.
I do, and it has now become it's a topic of conversation when I do in-store signings, because I have been cajoled by readers into actually including a playlist in the acknowledgments of my book, and you may notice it in South California Purples. I can't remember if I started there or not. In any event, here's the ritual. When I start writing, it is I know that I'm looking at a 6 month window of time pretty much to complete a first draft of a manuscript. And I approach it very much as a 6 day a week, all day, every day, full-time job. I'm a full-time writer. I don't have another job. This is what I do. So when it's time to hunker down and write the next book, that's how I approach it. And because I write in the 70s, and because it's an era that I remember and that I like, I create an architecture for the book. I have an outline. I'm an outliner guy. I want to know exactly where I'm going, and I have a title. I always write my books to a title, and I want it to feel like a certain way. I want it to have a tone. This thing, and I view this piece of art that I'm trying to work on as an artist might have looked at creating an album. I want this thing to be one cohesive whole, that when you're finished, it was like listening to a great album. So I create a soundtrack for myself that is generally fixed in the time frame that I'm writing the book. So it's got a 70s time frame, and it fits the moods of the various sections and chapters and stories that I'm telling during the book. So that is all I will listen to during that 6 month period of time.
Wow.
While I'm doing it. And the reason is I have found that it creates some really good creative guardrails for me to remember from one day to the next what it's supposed to look like, what it's supposed to feel like, and what it's supposed to sound like in the world that I'm creating for myself. And it has worked for me. And you'll notice that the section headings for the interstitial headings in my books will be song titles, and they're generally pulled from the from the playlist that I created.
That's
But
awesome.
people were asking me at the end, well, what you obviously had more songs than 6 songs in your playlist. Where are the rest of them? And I said, oh well, I didn't know that anybody cared. So now I put a more complete playlist in the acknowledgments at the end of the book, and I have readers that will now tell me, well, I built the playlist, then I read your book while I listened to the playlist, and I loved it. So now I've got readers doing it. I don't know if that's a good thing or bad thing, nor am I recommending that you do it. I've never done it in reverse, by the way. I've never reread the book listening to the music. So
whatever works, that's the thing. It's got to get you from A to B.
that's the oddball ritual.
I love that. I love that. I absolutely love that. I want to ask you too about your other traditional mystery series, the Mike Travis series. And when I say traditional, what I mean by that is, he's an ex-LA cop, so that, which more of a police procedural thing, not a cowboy. But the twist there is he's gone to Hawaii to live, to get away from some of his troubles in Southern California. And of course, it doesn't work out that well for him. Tell us a little bit about the Mike Travis series, because I think it sounds interesting as all get out.
Thank you. It was that was the first series that I started my career with. I had left the music business, and my wife and I moved to Kona, Hawaii, where we ended up living for about 15 years, loving every moment of it. But I wanted to, I had always wanted to write a mystery. Didn't know whether I could or couldn't. So I just, like a lot of people do, you just do. So sat down and did it. And the first book was called Roadhouse Blues. It got a lot of really great traction and a lot of great support from independent bookstores in particular. And it ended up on the LA Times bestseller list right out of the gates. And nobody was more stunned than me. But how he came to be was, I had a very good buddy of mine who was a lifelong cop. We'd gone to school together since kindergarten, and he was just retiring as I was leaving the music business and moving to Hawaii. And I just kind of used him as a model of, what's he going through, because he was having some remorse about actually having retired, because it was a major part of his identity.
Right.
And my Mike Travis character had some of the similar kinds of things, and had been involved in some high profile cases Mike Travis had. And he just kind of wanted to get out of town and start over and be anonymous. And Hawaii is a great place to do that, by the way. And my wife and I enjoyed doing that. We didn't know a soul when we moved there, and we knew everybody by the time we left. It was that kind of a community. It is a lovely, beautiful, wouldn't swap it for the world kind of situation. But I set Mike Travis's world there because it was in my backyard. And I wanted to write Hawaii in a way that I felt was accurate, and that it wasn't all full of postcard cliches.
Well,
And that
if you don't mind me breaking in here, follow up on that a little bit, because I love to hear about setting, because setting is a character unto itself, and when done right. And my understanding, both with the Dawson series set, in Oregon, and the Mike Travis series set in Hawaii, that you've taken great care about what you just said, presenting that setting in this non-caricature way. So if you would, expound on that just a little bit.
Without sounding condescending, because it is certainly not my intention, but it always bothered me when I would read books about or set in Hawaii that I could tell were clearly not written by people that were from there. And there's this penchant for using too much pidgin English and using it wrong, uh, characterizing certain behaviors incorrectly. And the whole thing, when cobbled all together, sort of became a cartoon. And I really didn't like that, because like any culture, I mean, any culture, the people who are part of it take it seriously. So to minimize it is, I don't know, it's disrespectful at a minimum. So knowing that I was a Howley guy just showing up to Kona, I felt a great deal of obligation to get it right. And I asked all kinds of people about all kinds of stuff when I was writing this book. Am I getting this right? Am I getting it wrong? And I ended up getting invited to all kinds of fun things and places and events, weddings and things that I would have never been invited to had I not reached out and just asked, "Hey, show me how this works." And I fell in love with Hawaii, Hawaiian people, Hawaiian culture, and I was treated beautifully. But like with anything, you get what you give. And
Well,
if you act like
that
if
really
you barge in and act like a jackass, they're going to treat you like a jackass.
absolutely. I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but that leads to I really wanted to ask you about here, because I think what it all adds up to me is the ability to have and show empathy. People, I think sometimes we think of empathy as maybe having pity or something, and that's not empathy. Empathy is very different than that. And I think it really comes across, it certainly comes across in how I've seen you in our short time where we've known each other, certainly how I've seen you interact with other people. You're clearly a person of great empathy in your personal being. It definitely comes across in your writing and how the great respect that you show to characters, the good and bad guys. They never come across as caricatures or cliches. The land doesn't come across that way. But I think it really requires some thought and clearly, as you noted, you wanted to put that thought in, and that's why people wanted to invite you to things. They said, "Hey, look, this is a guy who actually gives a shit how we come across here," and that's a great thing. But I think to have that mindset, you really have to come in with a mindset of empathy. And so, first of all, tell me if I'm full of it here, but if not, then maybe describe a little more about how empathy you're writing.
Well, that's about the nicest compliment I could receive, and I don't know that I'm worthy of it, but that's a very, very kind thing to have said. And I value empathy when people deal with me that way. So I just like to return the favor. And we're all in this together, and everybody's suffering through something. And that's not what we ever lead with. Hi, I'm Baron Birtcher. Here's 9 of my problems I'm having right now. We don't ever do that. So we don't know what anybody's dealing with. So just assume that we're all struggling with something and be kind. Give everybody a little grace. You don't have to scream at people. And the internet is absolutely the worst playground in the world for that sort of modeling, because the things that people feel entitled to say to utter strangers just is shocking. But I think I am. This is a philosophy in progress, okay? But I think that a really good writer, definitely needs to be an empath in order to fully appreciate all the characters that you're writing. But I think you need to be part mirror and part sponge. I think you need to be part voyeur and eavesdropper. And I think you need to be part shrink as well. And if you can cobble all of those skills together as you sift your characters through your imagination, they tend to come out better. Does that make sense?
It does. And
Probably.
you know what you just described is a lot of what I think a good reporter has too. You all those things.
Yes.
Including I would say empathy. And
Yes.
it's hard to do sometimes. It's hard to put yourself in the position of somebody else. Especially when maybe, I mean, look, we're all human. We have belief systems too. When I say we, I mean reporters. And a lot of times it's we get caught up in this both sideism thing. And sometimes that, it does a disservice to people reading what we're writing. But I think you still, no matter what, we just did a story as an example on a gentleman named John Eastman. He's one of Trump's lawyers. He's one of the people who got indicted in Georgia. He teaches here in California, or did teach at Chapman University down in Southern Cal. And one of my reporters did a great piece on him, and I thought it was extraordinarily fair and balanced. And he talked to a lot of people, and he didn't come in with the, this guy's a kook and a conspiracy guy. And he came in with the idea of, well, who is this guy? Because at one time he was highly respected. And, how did we get to this? And to me, that's a far more interesting story than, screeching trumpet point of view all the way. Who wants to read that? I don't, right? So it feels like it's the same thing with even with fiction. You want people to give you something that's nuanced and not a polemic. We don't need that. You can buy that if you want it, but not in a mystery, not in a something that you allegedly read for entertainment, right?
I couldn't agree more. And it's certainly what I like to read. So obviously we value the same things in the authors that we seek to read. I like when an author can properly deploy a bad guy that also has human qualities. Because let's face it, people don't sit around twirling their mustache thinking, what evil can I perpetrate today? Most bad guys are actually just serving some prurient interest of their own. And the bad comes from just serving their own selfish purposes.
Right.
They're going to break into a car and steal a stereo because they need money for whatever they need the money for. The damage comes to the poor guy whose car just got broken into and lost his stereo. And things happen. There are consequences to that behavior. But the guy that stole the stereo didn't do that to hurt that person or to specifically just cause mayhem. There was a motivation. Maybe it wasn't a noble one, but there was a motivation. And you can shrug your shoulders and go, God, that's sad. Well, everybody wants something. Everybody wants something.
Right.
And if you can navigate that with your characters in your story and make it real, excuse me, I have a dry throat today. That's it brings your characters to life, I think.
Well, wise words for anybody working on the mystery or any kind of fiction right now. Think about that. Think about empathy. Think about how you make your characters three-dimensional. That's what we're after here. Baron, I like to end on, as I've said, what I hope is a fun question. I certainly mean for it to be a fun question. Let us say I have the magic power. I can put you together for a trail ride, a conversation, a drink, whatever, dinner with one of the following three people. Just one of the following three people. Who would you pick and why? And the options I'm going to give you: the old cowboy film star Tom Mix, the pioneering DJ Alan Freed, or the first lady of cowboys, Dale Evans. One of those three, who would you choose and why?
Wow. That is a very imaginative question because that touches on a lot of different areas of interest for me. Who would I want to go on a trail ride with or hang out with? You know, I think I would like to. I'd like to hang out, have a drink or two with Dale Evans, and I would like to hear her take on being a female cowboy hero, because she was
Mm-hmm.
in her own right in an era that wasn't really done. She was an iconoclast in a certain way, and in
Mm-hmm.
another way, she was a role model.
Yep.
And I'd like to know how she navigated that because there was nobody to ask advice of. And she
100%.
clearly had a backbone and she clearly had a destination in mind. And I'd love to know how she discovered it.
Absolutely. Well, Baron, this has been a lot of fun. I hope everybody out there got a little something out of it. I know I did. I got a lot out of this. I highly recommend if you haven't discovered any of Baron's work, check it out. The new book, Reckoning, which is the Ty Dawson series, the third in the Ty Dawson series, is out today on the day we're recording this. Now, you'll be hearing it a couple of weeks down the road, so it should absolutely be available wherever you get your books. And if it's a small independent bookstore, all the better. Let's support everybody in our local community as best we can. Hey, it's been fabulous. Like I say, I really learned something here today. Appreciate you coming on the show. I'm going to leave everybody with a couple of thoughts. One, hit subscribe, please, if you haven't done that. Leave me a nice review if you would. That helps other people find the show. Again, it's not don't do it for me, but do it so other people will find the show. And especially if you know somebody who thinks that they might want to start writing, maybe you want to start writing. It's a great way to get some really solid insight from people who've been doing it a long time and with great success and with great empathy. We really appreciate that. So hit that subscribe button and tell a friend if you would. That'd even be better. Make these people that much more widely known out there in the literary world. Do that. And then the last thing I always leave you with, same thing, the regular listener, tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please make today count. For my great guest, Baron Birtcher, for myself, Rich Eisen, this has been the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words. Please come join us next time when we'll have another great writer to come on and tell us a little bit more about how they do what they do. Until then, take care.
Thanks, Rich.
Absolutely.